Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Wix Studio Tips. Today I'll show you how to leverage custom CSS in Wix Studio to create awesome effects in variable fonts. We will unlock new typography options to make your site pop. So let's dive right into it. Let's take a look at the animations that we're going to be building. First one is called breathing animation. I have a few text elements here with an animation on their font width, which makes them increase and decrease in size. And they have a little bit of delay between each other, which makes them have this breathing effect. And they're all placed in a stack with this arrow with an animation on scroll. That's the first one. The second one is called hover menu, where I have these few text elements. And when I hover over them, I can see that the font becomes bold and italic and makes some image appear in the background. Next one is a link hover effect. I have a paragraph and a link which is only on a few words inside this paragraph. So when I hover over this link, I can see that the font changes and a nice little effect also appears behind the font, which we'll do together using the CSS. And the last one is split hover. This is where I have one text element on which I hover and I see that half of the text becomes thin and the other half becomes wide, and vice versa. So we're going to build this together, and to understand what is variable fonts and how we will implement it, I want to show you a quick preview of different variable fonts just to open your mind what's possible, and not only the simple fonts that I'm using right here. So I have a website which samples a few variable fonts, and you can play with their properties. The variable font properties are called axes, and each designer who creates these fonts assigns specific axes to their font that you can then manipulate using CSS. So this one right here is an example of a simple font which has weight and width. So I can change on this scale, I can change the width of this font and you can see it immediately reflecting here, and also the width. So the weight and the width. And I can use different combinations. I can use a very narrow font but very bold, or narrow and thin, or the opposite, very wide and thin. Okay, hopefully that makes sense for the regular fonts, but the variable fonts can also offer some crazy fonts, such as this one. It's called OC Format Charts, and the axis for this font is shatter. So you can see that when I'm playing with this range, the text shatters, and it can happen seamlessly if you use animations, the CSS animations, to switch between the 100 value on this axis to 300, and you can make this font shatter. And remember, this is not SVGs, this is not Lottie animations, this is actual text. So you can copy it, you can write whatever you want on the go, and it's also good for SEO and accessibility. Another example is this font right here, which offers little icon animations. So it has also regular letters and numbers, just like here, but there is an axis called animation. So if you play with the animation axis, you can see that these little icons right here are animating. So you can either use this font and make your own personal small micro interactions on your website using the variable fonts, or looping this, or making this play only on hover. So you decide when to apply this animation to it. So that's just to open your mind of what's possible with variable fonts. And we're going to be using custom CSS to implement these animations and use the variable fonts. So this tutorial might be a little bit advanced, on the advanced side, but all the resources are going to be listed in the comments below, so don't worry, you can just copy and paste it, and it should be pretty simple. Just follow the steps. First things first is we need to upload the variable fonts to the editor. So I have my editor open with my elements already placed. We're not going to be focusing on how to build this section. I will quickly go over the elements placed here, but we're going to be focusing on how to apply the variable fonts using CSS on this section. So I have my text element selected, and to upload the variable font, I'll go to Fonts, Upload Font, and select the variable version of my font. So when you download a font, you have a few versions. You have the variable one, if it is a variable font, or you have the static fonts. And here you have a lot of versions, different versions of your font with different combinations. So you have expanded light, for example, or expanded semi-bold, or you have a regular bold, extra light. So these are all kind of snippets from what your variable fonts can actually do. But using the variable font version of this, we can use any width and customize our font the way we want to customize it. And I will show you how we customize the font. So once you upload your font, we can now open the dev mode. Right over here, start coding. And we will need to switch to CSS. So we'll open the global CSS file. And this is the file that we're going to be using, the global CSS. Now we need to start writing the CSS to apply the variable font or to adjust the axis of our variable font in CSS. So to first of all understand the axis that this variable font has and have a quick preview and the ability to play with all these axes, because in the editor it's not possible, unfortunately. I have this website here where you can simply drag and drop the font that you downloaded, the variable version of it. And once you drop it here, down below you will see a quick example of the font with the available axes to adjust. So this font right here has 3 axes. It has weight, nord, and italic. So if I play with these ranges right here, I can see a preview of how the font looks like when entering this value to this axis. And I can do all kinds of different combinations using these axes. And I can choose how italic I want it to be. And I can increase the nord and decrease the weight. So I can have this very thin italic font. And the output is written over here, or it's already ready for your CSS right over here. So some fonts can have 1 axis and some fonts have a lot of axes. So everything will be written here, and that's the only thing you'll need to copy to your CSS to adjust the properties of your variable font. All right, so let's, taking all this in consideration, let's start implementing the variable fonts in our CSS file. So first of all, we understand that we want to apply an animation, a breathing animation on these text elements. So I'm going to start with adding a keyframe. I can add a keyframe and I will call it wacky. You can call it whatever you want. I will call it wacky. And I want this to start from 0% until 100%. And what we're going to input here is the axis that we would like to change for this font. So how do we approach this property in CSS? Is by writing font variation settings. There we go. And here you can input the copied properties from here, or you can write them by yourself. My font has only weight. It's not the font that I used in the example. I'm using a different one here in the editor. So mine has weight. That's how I select the weight property. And it's going to start from 100 weight. The animation is going to start from 100. And I can copy this and paste right here where my animation is going to end. And I want this to end on the maximum weight, which is 800 for my font. Okay, so we created the keyframe animation. So right now we need to apply this animation on the text elements on my section. So to make it efficient, I stacked these elements together. So if I open the layers panel, I can see that I have a stack here with 5 text elements. And that's because instead of giving different class names to all of these text elements, I just want to apply this effect on this specific stack and on its children. So I will apply the animation on the children of the stack. So the only thing we need to select is the stack itself. And we can do that by giving a class name to the stack. So while the stack is selected on the section, down here in the CSS classes panel, let's add a new class, and it's called, I already have one, it's called welcome stack. You can use any class name whatsoever. I used welcome stack. And this is how we approach it using the custom CSS. So let's write welcome stack, and to select the elements inside this stack, they're called rich text. Let's select one, and down here we have global text classes. This is how you select the text element. Now, to specifically adjust the font of the text element, you should use this one, the second one, which is rich text double underscore text, and only then apply your CSS. That's what can change the font of your text element. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna use rich text double underscore text. And here we will apply the animation that we created. So animation is called wacky. We want it to go back and forth. So we're gonna do alternate. And how many times? Infinite. We just want this to loop. Now we can also add the duration we want for this animation to happen in. So the animation duration, let's do it 2 seconds. And we can also add an easing to it. So the animation timing function, you can choose from any of these. You can use your own custom one. I showed in my previous video how to create a custom ease, but we're just going to use ease in out for this animation. Okay, so let's preview and see what happens right now. All right, so it works. Our variable font is now breathing, but there is no delay between the text elements, so everything is breathing together. How to add a delay? And that's where the children order comes in handy, the stack children order. So we will select the stack, welcome stack, and this time we will select the number of child each time we're applying the delay. So we will need to select the child using this selector, only the rich text without the text, and add nth child. It starts from second. All right, so stack children start from second order. So this first text is second in order. And after we selected the second element, we want to apply the delay on the animation to the rich text. So we're just gonna copy this and paste it over here. So that's how you select the child inside the stack. And we're just going to add animation delay and use 0.1 seconds right here. So that's adding 100 milliseconds delay on the first animation. So to apply the rest, we can simply copy and paste it and change the numbers here. So we're gonna do it like this, fourth in order. Let's give it another delay. Let's add 2 more. So it's going to be like this. We have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And of course, adjust the delay right over here. Okay, so we added a few seconds of delay between each element right here. And this is how the CSS looks. It's not too much. It's not that difficult. And when you click preview, you can see now that each text element has its own timeline in this keyframe. It happens in a delay, so it gives this kind of nice breathing effect. And if you want to add this nice little scroll effect on the arrow behind, you can select the arrow on stage, go to the interactions tab, and in scroll, add a parallax or move or any effect that you would like. I added the parallax. And while the scroll to preview is toggled on, you can see it happening live, and adjust the animation here as well. So let's decrease the time it takes and the speed to negative because I wanted to start from the bottom, from over here. And if we hit preview right now with the variable fonts and with the scroll animation, we can see a really, really nice effect happening on our section here. All right, so let's move to the second effect, which is the hover menu. Now here we already have a stack with a few elements inside, and we want to select each element here and also change the axis on hover. So how we're gonna do that is, once again, down here, add the new section. I always love working very tidy, so I love adding these categories here. So let's do page number 2, which is the hover menu. First things first is that we need to apply the default settings on our variable font, and we'll do that by once again adding a class to our stack and selecting the elements inside the stack. So let's add hover stack. That's how we're going to call it. And we're going to select this stack in our custom CSS, and also the text inside the stack itself. And now we need to apply the variation settings on this variable font. So let's do font variation settings. And this is actually the font that I am using here. So I had a few, I played around with this sample a little bit until I found the properties that I want to copy, and I have them already written down. So I'm going to apply weight 300, width 100, and ital 0. So even if you are not customizing a specific axis, you need to write it down when transitioning your variable font, because if one of the axes is missing from the default state to the hover state, your whole variable font is not going to transition to the hover state. It will not happen in an animation. So even if it's 0, just write it down. So we have the variation settings written down, and we want to apply the transition, which will be 500 milliseconds, and it's gonna ease on all the parameters. All right, so we've got the default settings, and now we want to apply the animation on hover. So how do we do that is simply we can copy this whole thing, paste it again, remove the transition, because always use transition on the default state and not the hover, and that will give you an animation when hovering and when removing your mouse from the element. It will animate back. If you only use transition on the hover state, it will only animate to the hover state and then snap back to the original default state when you hover your mouse out. So right now we want to adjust these settings on hover. So right here we will add hover state, and we will change these settings: the weight to 700, the width to 120, and ital to 12. Okay, and that's it, because we want this animation to happen on all the text elements inside my stack. So it's enough that I created a class name for my stack and applied these settings on all the text elements inside this stack. So let's click preview and see what happens. There we go. Now it's animating. All right, looking good. So what we need to add is now the animation that we had with our background image. So I have, if I select the section right here, I already added this background video on the section, but we cannot see it because we have these images covering it. So on hover, on each of these text elements, I want to make the images appear. But if nothing is hovered, I want only the video to appear. So how we're gonna do that is by selecting the text element, going to interactions, hover, and applying the animation on the images. So you can or select it from stage, but because we have a lot of images covering each other, each image is stretched on the whole section, so you cannot reach the bottom images. So I'm using the layers panel right here to select these images, and I'm going to select one by one. So this is the first image, and I want it to fade in. All right, so I'm going to select adjust animation, make sure it's fade in. Wonderful. I'll move to the next text element and do the same for each and every one of them. And there we go. So everything is applied. All these hover interactions are applied on the images. So if we click preview, we can see the background video. And when we hover over these menu items, we can see that it changes the image that we see on the section. Awesome. So now you might be asking yourself, okay, cool, we can apply this variable font on text elements, but can we do it on buttons? I have a button here. Am I able to apply the variable font on the button? And the answer is yes, and it's pretty easy to accomplish. So the same way that we applied the animation here and the variation settings, we're going to do the same thing for the button. So this button right here has a class name of my button, very original, and I'm going to select it here, my button. And to apply the variable font on the text, we will need to select the button label. Okay, there's the button itself with a background, with a border, and all the styling settings. But we need to apply the font on the text inside the button, which is called button label. So we're going to select my button and then add button underscore label. It actually needs to be double underscore, so there's two over here. And once you've written that, you can simply copy these properties, paste them here in the button, and also copy this and add the hover state to the button. Remove the transition, and we can use the same properties we used right over here to make it consistent. So now we have the animation applied on the menu items inside the stack and also on the text inside the button. So if we click preview, we should hover over the button and see the text changing. And that's exactly what we've got. All right, so now let's move to the third example, and that's the link hover. This is a pretty easy animation, and it's exactly done the same way as we've done in the previous examples here. But this time I want to show you a trick of how to select a specific text inside a big paragraph. So let's create another category here called page 3, and that's the link hover. So we keep everything organized. And first things first, again, we will need to apply a class name on this whole paragraph. And it's going to be my paragraph. Okay, and down here, I will again select it by writing dot my paragraph. Make sure you are using capital letters if you use them in your class name, because it is key sensitive. CSS is key sensitive, so just make sure it's exactly the same as the class name right here. And on this paragraph, we would like to only emphasize on the link inside this whole paragraph. So as we all know, only a few words inside a whole paragraph can be a link, can work as a link. So how do we do that? Is just by selecting these few words, the best fonts. We can apply a link on them. It doesn't really matter where it leads us right now. So I'm just gonna do a dummy link, which is the anchor to the top of the page. And we're automatically gonna get this underline that we can remove down here. So right now, only these 3 letters are a link. And to select them, we add the href tag, which is A. So we have my paragraph A, and this selects the link inside our paragraph. And now we want to also customize the settings for this link. So we're going to copy these that we already written here instead of writing everything from scratch and adjusting them a little bit. So we want this to be 600, weight, width 0, and ital 0. Just like that. Now we don't see it here yet because I'm still in the text edit mode. So when you close it, you will see that these settings are applied on my link element right over here. And all right, so we have the variable font applied on that, but we need to add a hover effect. So once again, to add a hover effect, we can simply copy this and add hover and change some settings here. So the settings we're changing is 800, 120, and italic. Let's do 8 this time. And of course, I forgot the transition. So let's add transition. Let's make it quick and let's ease it on all of them. All right, so we're done with the link. So if I click preview, I can see that only my link inside this paragraph is changing its style on hover, and it's very smooth. But in my example, I showed this nice yellow background that is added behind the link. So that's a little extra, and we're gonna do that together. It's not that difficult, but you don't need it. If you don't need it, you can skip it, no problem. I'm just gonna real quickly show how to do it. So our text element is the link here, and to add this background, the yellow background, we will use the pseudo element called before. So here I'm gonna write before, and I will start styling my element. So I'll add content. We don't need any content inside, so I'm just gonna leave it blank. I'm gonna add the display type, which is inline block. I will add the position, which is going to be absolute. I'm gonna place it 50% from the top, and the top is the top of my href, of my link. Now, when it's absolute positioned, I need to make sure that my link right here is positioned relative. Okay, so this way, any placement that I use here on this yellow background will refer to the size of my link because I'm using position relative. So top is 50%, left is 0, width is going to be 100. No, it's going to be 0 at first, and we'll only increase it when we're hovering over it. So width is going to be 0%. Height is 30%. You can play with this, you can adjust it. Mine is 30%. And now we'll need to add a background color. So let's add a background color. And the color that I'm using is called FFC600. That's the one. And if it's not the correct one, you can click on this rectangle here and start choosing your exact color that you want. And now we want to add the transition, which is going to be 0.2 seconds is all. All right, and on hover, we're gonna do the same before, open the brackets, and only change the width to 100%. So we're gonna change the width to 100% from 0% on hover, and that's the only thing we're animating. So here in the transition, we can also, instead of using all, we can just write width. But if you are adding more properties here, make sure you are including them here in the transition, or simply leave it all. So if we preview this right now, we will see that it actually is created, but it's above our font and not behind our font. So we can edit it. We can fix it by setting the Z index. So we will change the Z index over link element to 1. And we will change the Z index of our rectangle to -1. And that should do the job. There we go. So pretty simple. We designed this rectangle thing in CSS and only animated the width. So it starts from 0% and animates to 100. Amazing. So that is done. And we're moving to our last example, which is split on hover. So we have this text element right here. And it is one text element. It's not split into two. And it has a variable font applied to it, even though this is empty. We will just need to give it a class name as usual. So I'm going to create a new one, page 4, split hover, and let's call this split hover. That's the class name on my element, and I will select it in my custom CSS as well. Split hover. All right. Now what we need to do is apply the settings once again, which is a simple copy and paste from the previous ones. Change this default to 500, change this to 150, and italic 0. Now it's not applied. Oh, that's because I forgot to use the rich text. I forgot to add this class. Okay, remember when applying the font styles, use the class you provided, and then the class, this one, rich text __ text. And only then it applies the settings on your actual font. So we did see that it changed, and we want to add a transition, of course, of, let's do 250 milliseconds. Ease out. That's the way. And now we want to apply the effect on the other half of the text. So somehow we will need to select the second half of my text. How do we do that? Is by creating this HTML tag with some kind of trick. So my trick here is to select this text and change the color from any theme color that you chose to your custom colors. And it can be the same one. So visually it looks exactly the same. But now because this font, this text right here has a different color, we created behind the scenes a span element that we can now select using CSS. And how do we do that is by, again, selecting the element itself, split hover, selecting the text, and span. Just like that. We will copy the variation settings again and adjust them. And as you can see, only this half of my text is now changing its style, because we're selecting the span that we just created inside the text. By the way, this color right here looks like that because its blend mode is set to overlay and it's not completely black. So if that may confuse you, I'm using the black color and blend mode set to overlay. And there is some background video playing on my section. Okay, so we have the default settings set on the font, but now we want to change them on hover. So we already did that. It should be pretty simple and straightforward. So I'm just gonna run and do that. And we're gonna do that by selecting our text element, adding the hover state, and selecting the text itself inside. Now we want to change on hover the left side, which is the regular rich text, not the span. We want to change it to the style of the span, and the span inside of this rich text, we want to change to the style of the rich text. Okay, so just copy and paste. So I hope that's not confusing. On hover on this whole text element, we're changing the text element itself, which is this left side. We're changing it to the same properties as our span, which is the right side. And the span inside this text element is going to change to the properties we originally had on the left side on the text. Okay, so now if we click preview, we can see the video playing, and where we're hovering over this text element, we see that the fonts are actually changing. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully you followed. If you have any questions, write down below in the comments. Hopefully I'll answer them in a matter of a day or two. And I know this is a lot to follow. As I said, this is a little bit on the advanced side because we're using custom CSS and mostly is done using CSS and code. But hopefully everything was very informative, so you will be able to follow. And if you like this video, please subscribe and like this video. It will help my channel grow, and I'll be able to release more and more tutorials such as this one. And if you have any special requests, also write down below, and hopefully the next video is going to be one of them. Thank you so much. See you in the next one.